بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد رسول الله محمد المصطفى الذي أرسله الله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Again, I want to apologize to all of you for the lack of heat in this space, and I want to thank you for coming on this evening, on a Sunday evening, where most people have to go to work the next day. We're excited about the fact that this is our second workshop at Khalil Center now that we've held this community workshop on site. Those who are not familiar with us, we have been doing a lot of community programming in the respective communities of the Chicagoland area. But today, this is our second one that we're doing at our site since we've moved into this building. We have a unit which is Unit 103, which is kind of down the hall. Those who entered from this side, you would keep going, and those who entered from this side, you would keep going on that side, and you would enter over there. And today we have rented this space, which also used to be Darul Qasim's old space, by the way. And ironically enough, Sheikh Hamza, who's also on the board of directors of Khalil Center, he is also an instructor at Darul Qasim. So we're happy to have him, and Fahad Khan, who is going to be part of our panelists, who will be joining us inshallah this evening. And he's a psychotherapist with us at Khalil Center. He's a therapist, and our newest addition to our staff, whom we're excited to welcome, is Dr. Sara Sayyid, who has joined us, who is originally from Texas, from the Midwest, but studied in Texas and has returned to the Midwest to serve her community, and she's joined us for that. So Jazakumullah khair to all of you for coming. I want to give you just a brief disclaimer, and we'll probably repeat this disclaimer as people start to trickle in at another juncture. This workshop and the title of our workshop, which is addressing the elephant in the room, sexual abuse and trauma within Muslim communities, is a very sensitive topic, and is particularly sensitive because of the time period that we are witnessing and kind of the social, cultural sort of things that are going on in the Chicagoland area. We want to make a disclaimer that this program is not and will not address any legal proceedings related to any particular cases that have been that are in recent controversy or scandals that are currently happening in the Chicagoland area or beyond. Nor is this a Sharia court where we will be entertaining any sort of or dealing with this in sort of a legalistic or jurisprudential kind of way. But rather, it is our response to a reality of a problem, independent of the current situation, but has sparked a lot of conversation and has sparked a lot of emotion and trauma within our community recently that has come up. And this is our intent, to try to approach this topic and to be able to address it both from a professional, psychological, sort of social service background orientation, as well as from the Islamic perspective, whom Sheikh Hamza has joined us for this evening. So just that is the disclaimer that I want to make. And let me inform you about the layout of the program for this evening. I will address you in talking about trauma and sexual abuse as it affects communities and the larger community as a whole, because not only are individuals affected, but communities are also affected. And then we will move on, and Dr. Sara will then talk about the impact of it on individuals, and from the standpoint of the victim and the psychological sort of implications and consequences that it has. And then Sheikh Hamza will conclude the final talk, where he will address us and speak to it from an Islamic viewpoint and lens as Muslims. How would we look at this, and how would we approach this sort of problem? Finally, what we will do at the end is that we will then break off into sort of a forum and a discussion forum / Q&A. And the brothers will remain here. And because the sisters are so valuable to us in Islam, we will send them to the room that has heating. And they will be over there, and they will have a more private space, independent of the brothers, that they can talk amongst themselves and address some of the things that are coming up that might be gender specific or not comfortable to address within a larger audience. The other disclaimer that I would like to make is that we will also, during the course of the seminar workshop, or nor during the workshop, nor during the breakout sessions, is it appropriate to make any personal self-disclosures about one's own personal trauma if that has occurred to anybody in this audience. Although we take that very seriously, and we don't want to marginalize anybody within our communities, we want to make sure that we give it its due importance by giving it special attention and making sure that we address it and talk about it in its appropriate setting and environment. So we would ask that you would approach one of us maybe afterwards and pull us aside, and we can talk about avenues to help either yourself or others whom you might know that might be suffering from some of these problems and would like some assistance from us. So I'm done with my emceeing part, and now I will transition into my talk. And then throughout the course of this, I will sort of help moderate the remainder of the program, insha'Allah ta'ala. So what kind of So from my position, I'm addressing you about community trauma and crisis of trust for scholarship, for Islamic scholarship, that is. So community trauma, there's an issue in our community right now, and in communities in which this occurs, particularly and especially since we're talking about Muslims, that this can be very traumatic. And we want to qualify in the seminar that I'm doing, what kind of trauma are we talking about here? What kind of trauma are we, what kind of abuse are we talking about? What kind of sexual abuse, for that matter? Because there's multiple levels or kinds of sexual abuse. And this seminar is in particular focusing on sexual abuse where there is a power differential, and where it affects women or minorities predominantly. Okay, so minors or those who are in positions of lesser power. So that's the framework, that's the problem that we are addressing. That's the one that has come up very recently within our community, and that's the one that we want to speak to. So just to preface that, so you know what kind of trauma we're talking about, and we're not talking about spousal abuse, or we're not talking about domestic violence, we're not talking about other kinds of sexual abuse, just so you're aware the kind that we're zooming in on. And all of those other topics require their own format and forum, and there could be a seminar altogether. In fact, this whole program, this whole talk about sexual abuse could be a day-long program, and I think that that's something that is needed. So we're just starting off by addressing one segment of it in our seminar today. So there is an initial shock that has taken place when trauma occurs. This is unique to, this is specific to trauma. This is not uncharacteristic of traumas, that there's a shock. In fact, PTSD, once upon a time, used to be called shell shock. So there is a shock that takes place, and there's a bunch of questions that arise in the mind. And then we're talking about on communal level, because Dr. Sada will talk about the individual effect. But on a communal level, some of the things that are kind of arisen for us as Muslims is how could this possibly happen? How could an individual use their power, use their manipulation, and affect another human being in this way and manipulate such a vulnerable individual? The other questions are, how do good people do bad things? If we have a good and positive impression of somebody, and we see them in such a high regard, but then we find out some information about them that is really ugly and turns us away, then how do we address that? How do we look at that? Other questions are, what was my judge of character? I thought this person to be a good person, but then it ends up being that that's not the case. So that's another issue that we want to look at. Can clergy be trusted? Because we have an issue with questioning religious authority and whether they can be trusted or not. And the fact that you never saw this coming. It was surprising. It was all of a sudden. All of a sudden you're hit with this from left field, and it's upsetting. So we'll talk about some of those. Now, to start off, the communal trauma. So social identity is a person's sense of who they are. And a person's sense of who they are is based upon their group memberships oftentimes. How they see themselves, their values, their own sense of self and their identity, and their personality, and their personal values, and their own self-esteem and pride is tied to their belonging. So psychologically, we know that people's sense of self is often tied to their sense of belonging to their communities and groups. And so when a trauma occurs, where there's something horrendous that happens within that community, that kind of shakes the ground from underneath them and can have a deep impact not on their sense of self and on the community as a whole. Additionally, as Muslims, we also have this issue where we have to wrestle with our identities being hijacked all the time. And who speaks for Islam, and how do we represent Islam and Muslims and their identity? That's often an issue that we are wrestling with within our current culture and social sort of setup. What else? People tend to turn to us to represent us, group representation. People come up to us and they ask, they ask about Islam. We'll say, Hooman, you're from the Middle East, and my, colleague asked me who's not Muslim, and says, what's with the oil prices dropping? The gas prices are low at the tank today. What's with that? I was like, I don't know. I pay the same price you pay at the pump. I don't have any sort of special deal on this gas prices just because I'm from the Middle East. So a lot of people tend to associate a group identity with and this is out-group bias as a whole as well. So people tend to view out-group individuals as belonging to the same group. So when somebody does something bad, it then has a negative reflection on the rest of us. And then we have to try to account for that, or to try to try to correct that in our social perceptions of how other people are going to look at us. So you can see how group and social culture has a deep impact and connectedness with the sense of individuality of the person. What else? From a religious perspective, as Muslims, this is by no means acceptable, sexual abuse, and it is not to be minimized or taken lightly whatsoever at all, because it is our communal responsibility, and we have an ethic in the Islamic tradition of the protection of individuals within the community. That's what our system and our rules surround about protecting human beings and individuals from being mistreated by others. And that's what some, and it might be different than other cultures. It might be different than the Western system of rules, or how the law is set up, just a little bit or slightly, but it operates from a different theoretical framework to approach how to protect people. That's a fundamental sort of ethos of the Islamic tradition and law. Additionally, you know, I wanted to share with you a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. A hadith is a saying of the Prophet of Islam ﷺ, peace and blessings be upon him. And Imam Muslim has taken this out, and he relates من حديث ابن مسعود عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال ما من نبي بعثه الله في أمة قبلي إلا كان له من أمته حواريون وأصحاب يأخذون بسنته ويقتدون بأمره ثم إنها تخلف من بعدهم خلوف يقولون ما لا يفعلون ويفعلون ما لا يؤمرون فمن جاهدهم بيده فهو مؤمن ومن جاهدهم بلسانه فهو مؤمن ومن جاهدهم بقلبه فهو مؤمن ليس وراء ذلك من الإيمان حبة خردل. So, what does this mean? It says that the Prophet ﷺ, he said that there has not been a prophet from my days and before me, that has been dispatched to the people, except that there have been people who have supported him, who have joined him, who have followed his way. They have followed his tradition and that which he has commanded, and upheld what he has commanded. Then there has been a group that came after them, a group of them who say that which they don't do. So they claim to be Muslim, and then they will attach themselves to that identity, and they will put on sort of this external garb of being a Muslim, but they will admonish people to do that which they themselves don't do. And that they will do things that they were not ordered or told to do by the prophets. And now this is our responsibility. And whosoever opposes these people, goes against these people, and repels these people with their hands, with their strength and their capacity, then they are a believer. And the people who go against them with their tongue, speak against them, like what we are doing now, speaking against sexual abuse, they too are believers. And whosoever repels them with their heart, meaning that they dislike this within their hearts, they see this as abhorrent and disgusting in their hearts, then they too are Muslims. And after this, after disliking it in your heart, there is not even a mustard seed of faith left in the person if he doesn't do any of these three. So he has to do at least one or all of these things in order to have faith, to have claim to faith. So what is it that we are doing today? Is that we are trying to ensure that we take this thing very seriously, and that we don't take this light, and that it is absolutely and categorically unacceptable, whether a person be a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or of any other tradition, that they commit an injustice, particularly when they have a power dynamic, when they have power over another individual, to manipulate that with somebody vulnerable in order to abuse that right. So we want to make this crystal clear. And that as Muslims, we have a responsibility for the Muslims here, that we must do something in order to address this topic, and thereby we are here to address this topic and to speak about it. What else? Sexual abuse is a human problem. It is not only specific to one tradition. And there is a possibility that when something afflicts or affects one community, that we tend to overgeneralize, and we say that what is the matter with this community, or what is the matter with Muslims that they do these sorts of things, or what is the matter with this group of people that they do these things. We want to make it clear that this is a human problem. and that human beings all have this biological tendency, and we are pre-wired this way. And that there are some people who deal with this with this problem more than others. That it cuts across race, creed, ethnicity, all of that, and so we want to, and that it is very prevalent, particularly in our times. In our day and age, it is more of a problem in our day and age than it was in other ages. And we want to look at the reality that there's about 1 in 6 males before the age of 18 who have been sexually abused. 1 in 3, 1 in 4 for women. There's different statistics. And we find that the people of color, Asians and people from outside of white American, Caucasian background, European Americans, tend to have this problem a little bit more. That the women tend to be more vulnerable to abuse as well. So we want to pay attention to this, and that we want to also dispel the myth that this happens. So a lot of people tend to think, well, this only happens to people who just walk home late at night, for example, and that it is that this sort of abuse happens with strangers. But that's not the case. In fact, the majority of abuse happens with the most trusted individuals. Okay, people whom you would least suspect, whom you would think that would never do such a thing. In fact, family members are the greatest perpetrators, are the most likely perpetrators of sexual violence upon their children and women of the household. What else? In 2002, about 2,000 students between the 8th and 11th grade reported that 38% of these students that were in this survey were harassed by their teachers or school employees. Again, the power differential we're looking at. 42% of school employees or teachers had been harassed by each other. What other settings do we have? I'm just covering some statistics for you to show you to what extent this is going on. And it happens on institutional levels and in settings with the most trusted individuals. Okay, people whom we might least suspect. In educational settings, 14% have reported they have engaged in sexual intercourse with a teacher. Again, power differential. Among clergy, 2007, the Society of Jesus made a $50 million payout to over 100 Inuit people who alleged that they had been sexually abused. Power differential. Again, in 2008, the Diocese of Fairbanks had to file for bankruptcy because of the inability to pay over 140 claims against them of abuse. Healthcare settings. So it's not specific only to clergy. That we have it in healthcare settings, in institutional settings, in educational settings, and family settings. In 2000, a study of patients who had gotten psychiatric or counseling care after a former healthcare provider. And so basically these are individuals that came to counseling after they had been sexually abused by healthcare providers. And or they had been sexually abused. They had been sexually abused. 51% of the people who had been sexually abused had been by healthcare providers. 49% of them were by clergy. Another thing that we want to talk about, oftentimes people think that if you are an older individual, you're not as likely to be a perpetrator. In fact, older people can be both victims and perpetrators at the same time. And there is this idea that as you get older, sexual activity declines. There is truth to that. There's truth to that. But it's overgeneralized. People think that older people have a lack of sexual activity or that they have a lack of sex drive. That too is not the case. Here's another statistic to demonstrate that. People in the age of 65 to 74 reported recent sexual activity. And 26% of those people who reported were people that were between the ages of 74 to 85 years old. So that means that this problem doesn't necessarily go away when you get a lot older, although there can be some declines. We know that with power and abuse, whenever there's a power differential, there's a likelihood that there is a greater responsibility that comes with that power. Why? Because the people who are in your care trust you, number one, and number two, are more vulnerable to your authority. And human beings in general, from social psychological experiments, we've discovered that human beings tend to be obedient to authority figures. Just as today, for example, all of you are sitting here, and we've set up the situation, the platform in the way that is. You're all sitting on the ground. Some of you are sitting in chairs. You're listening to me. There is a system that we set in place here, and you are following it. Okay? So when you go to school, you're told that your teacher is going to teach you, and and you can turn to them and talk to them whenever somebody's bothering you or something goes wrong. When you're alone with your teacher, that's okay because that's a specific setting. That's a trusted individual. When you go to your imam or your priest or clergy, you can trust that individual because that person is a specific individual who is designed to take care of your needs. A healthcare professional. These are settings when we would least expect it, when we make ourselves vulnerable to these individuals. So it is much more likely that individuals will make themselves more vulnerable to those individuals. And it's also a greater possibility of that vulnerability to be exploited. So some people will say, well, why did these people do what they were told? Well, some of it is vulnerability. And some of it is a lack of education. And some of that we're going to talk about prevention. Prevention, how do we prevent this sort of thing to happen? How do we keep a positive impression of somebody and still have a good relationship with them without putting so much stock into them that we sacrifice our own safety? The other thing that I want to address is impression management. And this is an issue, and again, remember when I talked about people of color are a lot more likely to be victims than European Americans? Here's part of the reason why. Is because in collectivistic cultures, we have two different kinds of culture. Individualistic, collectivistic cultures that the literature talks about. Collectivistic cultures are those that emphasize more family, extended family, togetherness, a we-ness, a sense of community and belongingness, more so than individualized cultures. Now, part of that individualized, part of collectivistic cultures, a great strength of that is that there's a lot of social supports available for them. So whenever there's a problem, you can turn to some auntie or some uncle or somebody, talk to them. Whenever there's a community crisis, when you have extended family, you can turn your children over to these individuals. Now, the problem with this, though, here's some of the problems that can occur, is that we sometimes emphasize what others' impressions of us are to a detriment and to a fault. And that's what impression management is about. Because we say, what do people say? Oh, what will the people say about us? If we told other people, if we admonished or brought out the deepest, darkest secret about this uncle that is abusing this child, then what would other people say? How would that reflect in the community? Or if, and I've actually dealt with some cases like this where I will have a family come in and then the mother knows that some relative is abusing their child. And they choose not to get that child out of that environment. Why? Is it, well, I'm in that, what will people say? Where will I go? I will be seen as a divorcee. This child will be seen as abused or damaged or tainted. What are we going to do financially? All of these sorts of impression management, what will other people think of us? That causes, at times, people who are in very vulnerable situations not to get the care that they need. And so what I'm proposing is that we do not do this over impression management. There is a place for that in social norms which are good. It engenders a certain sense of of haya, shyness, modesty, and healthy shame that's in the community. That I'm ashamed to go out there and do something horrendous publicly because other people might think poorly of me, have a poor impression of me. But when you need to act, that should not serve as a hindrance for you to do that which is right for your family. مَنْ رَأَ مِنْكُمْ مُنْكَرًا فَلْيُغَيِّرْهُ بِيَدِهِ. Whosoever sees an injustice from amongst yourselves, that he should change it with his hands. وَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. And if he can't do it with his tongue, فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ. Then he should change, he should hate it in his heart if he doesn't control the conditions. So this is the saying of the Prophet ﷺ. So we have to balance social norms with the rights of minorities and those who are in vulnerable positions. One of the other problems of this is that what happens when in a religious community something goes wrong and there is a trauma that occurs. And we see this sometimes, right? So some people will say that they had some bad experience with a Quran teacher. As a child, they were beaten viciously, for example. And then what ends up happening, this person grows older, or the people around him say, look at this Quran teacher. He's been abusing the children. And now they form this impression of this individual as being a bad person, but then they overgeneralize and they say, these Molvis, these priests, these imams or these clergy members are all rotten apples. They're all gone wrong. And and we're not going to listen to them because they are backwards, barbaric people that tend to abuse people. And so they tend to overemphasize and catastrophize, overemphasize the problem and overgeneralize to the entire group. And so I think we want to be careful with that sort of thing. Now, I want to show the fact that this is actually a natural process. We have to understand it before we change it. The natural process of this is the following. There's a principle. Neurons that wire together, fire together. So how does trauma occur? So what ends up happening is that you have a negative experience. And when you have a negative experience, you have an emotion that accompanies that negative experience. And that emotion is really intense. It's a very bad experience that you had, a horrendous experience. The bad emotion is wired with that memory. And it gets stored in your memory and they get linked together. Okay? And in the area of the brain where memories and emotions are stored, they are very close together. So they wire together. Okay? And so now what ends up happening is later on, all of those things that are connected to that episode or event become primed or accessible or cued by your environment. So you go somewhere and you see a Quran, for example, a kid who has been abused as a child, he sees Quran. And then he looks at the Quran and he has a negative feeling towards it all of a sudden. But he doesn't know why. He might even feel guilty about it. Like, why am I feeling negative about this? There are instances where people will open the Quran and they'll blank out. They'll see white sheets. They won't even see the words on it. There are instances where that occurs. Some people think that a jinn has possessed them. I've actually had that before. But in fact, it's very possible that it's also a trauma. That you have a dissociative experience. What ends up happening is that the brain kind of shuts off. And so there are, and this can happen in multiple settings. As a community, when we hear of these sorts of things happening in the news and all of these sorts of things, it might hit us very strong. Again, our identity is tied to our religion. And we are stakeholders. This is our community. This is our religion. And who should speak for it? So the neurons, they then wire together. They also fire together. And so this is quite a possibility that this can occur in many settings where an individual has had a negative experience before, and then that becomes activated by their current situation. And so this is the drawback, and this is the negative part about abuse on a community level as well as on an individual level. That when we hear of these sorts of things, it may cause individuals to say things like what we've heard: I'll never send my kids to Quran again. I'll never go to a madrasa or to seminaries, Islamic seminaries again. I'll never trust scholars again. Why? Because they have this they have this reactiveness. Now that is understandable, but at the same time we want to moderate it to make sure that it doesn't become overemphasized. Another familiar example of this is like, you may actually have a response, a reactionary response, and you don't even realize why you're having that. So you might see a scholar, you might see a person like myself, a beard with a jubba. You might see a person like Sheikh Hamza, for example, that stands up here with his turban and his jubba and all of that, studying traditionally. You might have a negative response, negative reaction. And then you might even think to yourself, like, I don't overgeneralize and I don't stereotype people, but something just doesn't sit right for me. I just don't like that person, or I'm getting a negative vibe from listening to him or talking to that individual. And that could be as a result of the fact that there may have been some historical negative experiences that are being carried over. I'll give you an example. Like, let's say, for example, a person goes apartment hunting. You're going to move into a new place, and you're going apartment hunting. You're looking for a new place to move into. Now you go you go into a new space, and you walk in there, and usually this is feeling oriented for a lot of us. We walk in and we say, this feels warm. I like this. This has a nice feeling to it. I think I could live here. Then you go to another space, maybe it's got some upgrades that are a little bit better, but you're like, I don't like the vibe here. It just doesn't feel right. And you might think, well, I can't put my finger on why, but I just know that this feels a lot more homey for me. So part of that is because you may have had some experiences as a child, or that you are associating with particular things that are being cued in your environment that are making you feel comfortable in that space. The combination of those things. You can't put your finger on it, but you know it. You meet somebody and you're like, I like this person. This person has a really nice, friendly face. You could have no explanation for it. It may not be anything unique to the individual, but it might be more about you than it is about the other individual. So it's quite possible that individuals have a sort of leftover reactions that they then project or put onto other people. So that's the one thing to kind of be aware of, that we have to look internally and look at ourselves when we are dealing with some of these community problems. I'm just coming to the section on the cures. So some of the things that I can suggest in terms of community. One is that we must not run away from the discussion. A lot of times people want to run away from it. They're afraid of the implications of discussing this. That if we discuss abuse in our communities, that we're somehow going to discredit or make it bad in our communities. So we should, when we are feeling something, when there's a problem, we got to discuss it. And we got to discuss the avenues for its prevention as well as its cures. And we also have to discuss it with individual. This is, by discussing, I don't mean it's our like evening time gossip about, do you hear the latest news about so-and-so is doing this and that. No. That's not what I'm talking about. Talking about an individual has an issue. Man, this is bringing up a real serious issue for me. I'm finding that I can't trust scholars, or I'm having this trust issue, or this is what's coming up for me. And you check it out with people whom you trust and whom you feel that you can also connect with, and that you can then form a balanced response. So one is that we need to form a healthy, balanced understanding of the situation, not going on any extreme. So we can't go on this extreme of bashing all people. I'm never going to go to a healthcare provider. I'm never going to go to a madrasa again. I'm not going to go to Khalil Center again, or whatever. Just do that one in there just to see if you'd catch it. And the other thing is that we need to respond to it as a community, meaning that this is our community, it is a community problem, therefore we need to have a response. And we need to have avenues and spaces and places where victims can feel that they do have outlets to be able to address these sorts of issues. And so that is, and that's part of what we're doing, is addressing it here, and we are also opening up the forum to be able to discuss it here with each other, as well as having our targeted services for those individuals who might need further services to make that accessible and available within our community in a balanced and culturally and religiously sensitive and congruent way. Meaning that we are not going to take an extreme stance either. That we will help you through this problem, address the victim where it needs to be addressed, and address the community where it needs to be addressed as well. The other thing that I want to say is that we want to get away from character assassination, meaning that good people can do bad things. Okay? So just because an individual has done something bad, a Quran teacher, a scholar has taught communities or individuals or larger groups of people, does not mean, and then they do something bad, does not mean that that person is a bad person. Okay, we want to be able to separate action from character, because we are human beings at the end of the day. And everybody is susceptible to problems. There's no justification for the problem, for the crime. The crime is the crime, and it's to be punishable where it's found. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that person is bad, nor is it that all of that Quran that you learn, all of that hadith that you learn, all of that learning that you did under that person doesn't mean that that was ingenuous, insincere, or that you have to toss that away. It means that purity is where it is, and you got it. Okay? And that's something to hold on to and to recognize and give credit where credit is due. While at the same time recognizing that human beings are susceptible to falling a prey to this. And that we should not take a superiority approach to this where we believe that we are beyond this. Meaning that it is the individual that thinks that that I would never do this, or we would never do this. And it's only bad people that do this. No. It's very trusted people. It's very important people in our community sometimes. Sometimes it can be people that are in very important positions that do very bad things. That doesn't mean that we should think that we are beyond this, but rather we should be cautious over our own selves. Meaning that I should protect myself. And that I should never put myself in a position where I would exploit the vulnerability of another individual. Because at the end of the day, we are humans and we have human problems. And that this is so widespread that none of us are saved from this. And as Muslims, we believe that shaitan can come to anybody, that Satan can come to anybody. So we don't think that we are above Satan and that we are free from this matter. So that we should put it where it is due. The other thing is, the love and respect for somebody is also a different thing than putting yourself in a vulnerable, having reverence for that individual to the extent where you lose your own mind. Meaning there is no virtue in completely blind obedience to authority. That when an individual, now trust is important. We do allow trust and we do obey and we give respect and love. But the blind sort of authority, when individuals begin to violate fundamental norms and rights, those are situations when we have to stop and question what that person is doing, regardless of who they are. Nobody is above the law. None of us are above the law. And so even if a person is in a distinguished position, we have to be able to have love and respect and not be skeptical and critical about everything that people do, but at the same time have a healthy degree of skepticism to such an extent that we don't put ourselves in positions where we will create this sort of vulnerability to occur. The other, and my final point, is that this, especially with the recent phenomenon, it takes some time to heal. For the community I'm talking about, to heal. So long as the legal investigations are taking place, that's that's a different dilemma on its own. But the community will take some time to heal, and that the community needs to have these venues and avenues to be able to discuss it so that they can form the correct interpretations and make sense of this in such a way that they can move forward and grow stronger in their religious identity, and we as a community grow stronger, and that we get stronger in our resolve to pay attention to some of the things that maybe we haven't been paying attention to before. And that sums up my talk for today. The last thing I wanted to do was our plug, and that is that what do we do as Khalil Center to address this? The Khalil Center is an institution, that is inspired by the Islamic tradition in order to make the most essential services available within the context of the Islamic spirituality and religious backgrounds of Muslims, as well as opening its doors for non-Muslims within the context of spiritual healing and spirituality. And so that is what we do. And we have a team of experts, and we have a team of academics and clinicians and therapists and counselors and religious authority to be able to help deal with some of the social ills of the community. And this is just the right combination of specialities in order to come together to make such essential services available to us in our community. And I think, and it's not only about Khalil Center, it could be any service that does that, or any individuals, and that we should support those organizations and those institutions and form partnerships and join hand in hand in helping each other, ta'awanu ala al-birri wa taqwa, that you aid each other in God consciousness, that we should help each other and being able to make really essential services available to Muslims, because there is a lack of them available. And so we will, so quickly, I want to also raise your attention to a women's group that will be starting next week. It's called Jawharatul Islam, which means the jewel of Islam, which are Muslim women. And this is open for Muslim women. It's a support group. It's not for anybody who necessarily has problems. It's just a sisterhood group for people to come and connect with each other. And there will be calligraphy classes, and there's other sorts of activities. Sometimes there might be specific to women's issues. So there might be issues such as nutrition or diet or pregnancy or psychological health and other sorts of things. That's starting. Sister Samina, who is here actually today, is the one that's heading that and facilitating that. And you can talk to her. Can you just raise your hand so that people can identify you, Sister Samina? Is she not here then, Sister Samina? Maybe she's in another room then. Okay, anyways, we will find her, inshallah. And if you have any questions, then ask any one of the sisters here. Sabahat, is she sitting here or no? She's not sitting here. Okay, well, Dr. Sarah is here. So you can talk to her and those individuals who can help you get some more information for that. And we do offer professional therapeutic services. And it is completely confidential. And so we do protect and take seriously this confidentiality. So that's sometimes a worry for Muslims about exposing themselves. And so that's where we will conclude. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.